tonight. I want to welcome everyone for joining us. My name is Renee Scalacci, and I will be your moderator this evening. This is the first of many meetings for Advancing Alhambra, which is the City of Alhambra's plan to reduce cut-through traffic by focusing on key intersections. And we are so pleased to be joined by so many of you this evening. The community's participation in this process is critical. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. The meeting is being recorded this evening, and it will be posted later on our project website, which is advancingalhambra.org, one word, advancingalhambra.org. Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese transcripts will be posted there as well. After tonight's presentation by the city's engineering team, we will be taking verbal and written comments. Your input is so very critical in this process, and we look forward to hearing from each of you. Now for this evening, if you'd like to write in a question, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Just go ahead and click on the Q&A button, and you can submit your comment that way. For those who would like to speak verbally, please raise your virtual hand button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. When it's your turn to speak, we will call on you and we'll call out your name and turn on your microphone. You will then need to unmute yourself on your end. Each speaker will be given 2 minutes, and we'll have a clock up on the screen to help track time. In the event that you go over, please pardon us in advance for letting you know that your time is exhausted. We have a lot of people here tonight. We want to make sure we get a chance to hear from everyone. For callers speaking in, please dial *9, raise your hand. When it's your turn to speak, we'll read out loud the last 4 numbers of your phone number. When your number is announced, go ahead and unmute yourself by dialing *6. And don't worry, there's a lot of information, and we're going to be going over this again, and I will review it before we start speaking with the public. And also, I'd like to apologize in advance to anyone's name that we may mispronounce this evening. Please correct us. We want to know who you are and meet you. And now, from the city, I'd like to introduce Martin Ray, Director of Utilities Department, and Lucy Garcia, the Assistant City Manager, who will be saying a few words. Lucy.
Thank you, Renee, and thank you, everyone. Welcome to the City of Alhambra, Advancing Alhambra, which is the city's 710 Mobility Improvement Project program. On behalf of the City of Alhambra, we want to thank you certainly for your interest and for your feedback, both today and in the future, as we go through these important traffic relief efforts. As the Assistant City Manager, I'm joined today by Martin Ray, the Public Works and Utilities Director for the City of Alhambra. We represent or are your city liaisons to the 710 mobility improvement projects. In the event you have questions, please don't hesitate to contact us here at City Hall. As part of the city's efforts to develop appropriate concepts and projects, earlier this year, the city engaged the traffic engineering services of Kimley Horn and Gibson Transportation. Together, these engineers will provide expert support to the city towards the development of these important community projects. And of course, you've met Renee. Renee is also our community partner, but her focus is on comprehensive outreach to the Alhambra community. We want to make sure that all of our residents and all of our stakeholders have an opportunity to participate in our process. Thank you again for joining us this evening. At this point, I will turn it back to you, Renee. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lucy. I'll now introduce the engineering team. Robert Bloom is with Kimley Horn, and Pat Gibson is with Gibson Transportation. Following their presentation this evening, we'll open it up to questions and comments. Bob, Pat, let's begin.
Thank you. Let's try the next slide. Okay, I think Renee has already gone over this, so let's go to the next one. So let's do a quick overview of what we're going to try and accomplish tonight. We want to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of the status of the 710 extension and the 710 tunnel. So let's talk about that. Where are we now, and what kind of choices do we have given the current status of the tunnel? So really, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to identify your experience with traffic and the roadways in the southwestern portion of the city of Alhambra. So we're going to tell you what we think some of the issues are, and you're going to tell us if we're correct, or you're going to tell us what we've missed. Next slide. So here we are, the status of connecting the 710, the tunnel connection, the tunnel study that's been looked at connecting I-10 and 210 is no more. There is not going to be a tunnel built between 710 and 210. Caltrans and Metro will no longer support not only a tunnel, they'll no longer support any freeway connection between 210 and 10 via the 710 corridor. So what Caltrans and Metro told the communities along that corridor is that those corridor cities will have to develop excuse me, their own transportation solutions. And they allocated some money to the cities to help them start planning and even implementing whatever solutions they could come up with, given the fact that they were not going to have the 710. Next slide. So as you can imagine, that means there's a lot of planning going on right now. So the roadways in yellow are the corridors that the city of Los Angeles is looking at. How do they reconfigure those corridors? Do they have more cars on those corridors? Do they put more bicycles and pedestrians? So those are the corridor studies that the city of Los Angeles is doing. The red lines show the corridors that the city of Alhambra is studying, and those are the ones we're going to focus on tonight. Next slide. If we look closer at Alhambra, here are the corridors that we're looking at, and the four improvements you see along the Stub on the left-hand side, Fremont, Atlantic, and Garfield. Those are the corridors and the interchanges we're going to talk about primarily tonight. But there are also studies going along north of Valley and all the way along Valley. So the next slide will show us a list of improvements that we're already working on through the city: Garfield, Fremont, Atlantic, and Valley. All of those corridors are being reviewed and improved in terms of traffic signal synchronization and traffic signal equipment upgrades. And Fremont, from Valley all the way to Mission, is the subject of an improvement program that's being studied right now. Next slide. So in this particular study, we're really focusing on the area along I-10 and south of Fremont. I'm sorry, south of Valley. So where we are in the study is looking at existing operational problems. So we're right at the beginning of this study. Next, we're going to focus on developing and studying alternatives for the Stub, for Atlantic, Garfield, and the Fremont interchanges. And we're going to bring those ideas and the performance of those ideas back to you over the next few months to work through which ones make the most sense, which ones do the best at improving transportation, which ones have the least impact on right-of-way or land purchases, so that together we can select a list of finalists for those improvement areas, which will allow us to do an environmental analysis and go through the Caltrans approval process to get us to design and construction. Now, I would like to tell you that we're all going to be driving on improved roadways by September, but that's not going to happen. So realistically, this is a multi-year program, and we're at the beginning of that program. Next slide. We've done some work. We've been working on this for a few months now, and what our early testing has shown is that the highest priority for Alhambra residents and businesses is really to look at how do we improve the Fremont Interchange, and how do we deal with the weave of traffic between I-10 and 710, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. We've looked at the possibility of turning the 710 area between I-10 and Valley, changing that from its current 6-lane freeway status to maybe a 4-lane arterial city street. And then we're also looking at upgrades to Atlantic and Garfield. So this is the program we want to talk about with you tonight. Next slide. So what we've done is we've looked at not only just Alhambra, but what's happening in the whole San Gabriel Valley. And this graphic is from a fancy computer model that projects traffic forward to the year 2040. And it compares where the traffic is going and how much traffic is on each of these streets. It compares the alternate that does nothing, just continues what we have, compares that to the improvements that we just talked about. Changing the Stub to an arterial and improving the interchanges at Fremont, Atlantic, and Garfield. And in this graphic, if you see a blue line, that represents a reduction in traffic as compared to the future do-nothing alternative. If you see an orange line, that means traffic actually went up. So in the lower middle of your screen, you see the heavy blue line that represents changing the 710 Stub to an arterial street, and the orange lines at Fremont, Atlantic, and Garfield show that if we improve those, we could get a little more traffic through those. But the important part for all of us is if we look north of the freeway, we're not adding a bunch of traffic to the city street system. Now, Caltrans really wanted to see what this looked like on a whole San Gabriel Valley basis. And that's what this graphic was for. But the next graphic, the next slide, focuses more on the southwest portion of the city of Alhambra. So you'll see where we're able to reduce traffic. And the most important part of this slide is the portion of I-10 between the 710 on the left and over to Garfield and New Avenue interchanges on the right. The 10 actually increases traffic a little. So what we're able to do with the improvement program we put together, with the concepts we put together, we're able to keep traffic on the freeway longer. And that's really a major victory for Alhambra. So we'll come back to that and explain that. But this is the focused area around the I-10 corridor. Next slide. So when we ran all these fancy computer models, what we really found is Fremont, the Fremont Interchange is really the key to the use of the 710 stub. What happens now is the Fremont Interchange backs up onto the freeway. The traffic northbound on 710 that's trying to get on to the eastbound 10, especially in the evening, that traffic has to weave across all of the traffic that's trying to get off at Fremont, and that backs up onto the 10 eastbound, especially at night. Well, when I'm driving eastbound on the 10, I look forward and see all those brake lights on. I might as well just jump off at 710, take the stub north, work my way, force my way through Alhambra on Valley and Fremont and Atlantic. So all of that traffic, all of it, much of that traffic that's coming through on the stub is really coming through because that's where you hit the first backup on 10. So let's go to the next slide. So here are the 4 areas that we're trying to use that 710 money. Here are the 4 areas that we're trying to improve. The Fremont, Atlantic, and Garfield interchanges and the I-10 stub. What do we do at those 4 points to keep traffic on I-10, to keep traffic on the freeway longer, thereby trying to reduce traffic cutting through Alhambra? So the next slide shows some examples of what we're looking at. And in my view, the piece that I'm looking for is covered up here. But all this says is when we looked at vehicle miles of travel, vehicle hours of travel, and vehicle hours of delay, if we really looked at the 3 measures of congestion, those 4 improvements we just looked at had the opportunity, had the result of improving all of those measures, miles of travel, hours of delay. We reduced all of those in Alhambra, and even better, we reduced all of those throughout the sub, the San Gabriel Valley. Next slide. So here are the set of improvements that we're talking about. Converting 710 north to an arterial, looking at interchange upgrades, modernization to Fremont, Atlantic, and Garfield. And when we look at what's the highest priority, because of the backups I just explained, the highest priority is really Fremont and the 710. So let us take you through what we've found thus far and then get some of your input. Next slide. So I'm going to look at existing conditions just a bit. Next slide. One of the interesting things we found when we looked at the 710 all the way from Long Beach up to the I-10 interchange, we found 61 big humming overhead signs that directed people north on 710 to Pasadena. Well, surprise, surprise, you can't get to Pasadena from the northbound 710, at least not without cutting through Alhambra. So if Caltrans and Metro have said, we're never going to have a freeway connection north of the 10, maybe we shouldn't be sending all this traffic to Pasadena through the city of Alhambra. So we've got some discussions to have with Caltrans about what this signing is actually doing to us or for us. Next slide. So let's talk about the south end of the stub, the 710 and the I-10 interchange. Think of driving north on the 710 and you want to get on to the eastbound 10. You get over in the right lane, you take that right turn diamond ramp, and you pretty much stop at the top of that ramp and you look down and you wait until you can work your way into the traffic on 10. Part of the afternoon congestion on eastbound 10 occurs because I have a bunch of traffic on 710 trying to force their way onto 10. At the same time, traffic is trying to move to the right across that stream of traffic to be able to get off at Fremont at the same time that the Fremont ramp, off-ramp at Fremont, is backing up onto the freeway. So I'm losing capacity because of the backup. I'm losing capacity because of that weave, that crossing of the traffic streams. And as I said, if I'm a commuter on eastbound 10 and I'm coming up toward 710 and I look up ahead and all I see is brake lights, the easiest way for me to move is to get off at northbound 710, go up the valley, and then work my way through the city of Alhambra. In addition to that, that freeway interchange was designed assuming that we were going to have a continuation of the 710 freeway all the way up to hook into 210. So I have high-speed ramps, I have 70-mile-per-hour design speeds. All of that just encourages fast traffic along the 710 stub, which is probably not what we want, especially since we're pretty sure it's not going anywhere beyond where it is right now. Next slide. So here's a picture of what the congestion looks like at the 710 interchange. And obviously the red lines are the place where the congestion is the greatest. So you see the red line extending almost from the Fremont interchange back to and through all the way across Cal State LA. But if you look on the bottom of that 10 symbol, you'll see that there's a green line right under that red line. And that green line is the ramp that takes you to northbound 710. So if I'm back there in that orange approaching the 710, I'm going to see the red in front of me and I'm going to say, okay, I know where I'm going. I'm going to take the 710 stub and cut through Alhambra. So that's really what we're trying to figure out how to handle, how to accommodate. Next. Next slide. So the 710 stub, when I say 710 stub, I'm really talking about the portion of 710 from I-10 north to Valley Boulevard. Right now, before the pandemic anyway, right now it carries almost 50,000 cars a day, designed at full freeway standards, but it terminates in a T intersection and a traffic signal at Valley. So those things are not necessarily incongruity. There's a bunch of things here that don't match in terms of design. So that's what we're going to look at. How do we make them match? Next slide. All right, so this, for Alhambra residents, this is the most important slide we have. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on it. The box that's outlined in black here is the 710 stub. So these are year 2040 projections of how much traffic is going to be on the stub if we don't do anything, if we just leave everything as it is today. And I know the numbers are small, but I'm going to tell you what they are. This says in the year 2040, we are going to have 58,000 cars a day trying to use the 710 stub. And this is a special computer model that we have that allows us to track trips on any given piece of street in the network and figure out where those cars are coming from and where they're going to. So if we look at the black box and then go to the bottom of the screen here, those 58,000 cars, you can see most of them are coming from the south on 710, but there's a fair number of them coming from the west on 10. The more important part for Alhambra is, where are those cars going? Where are they coming from if they're on the stub? And if you look at the numbers, out of that 58,000 trips, only 8,000 of the 58,000 are from the west of the stub. The remaining 50,000 are going to the east toward and through Alhambra. Now, we've had questions of, well, wait a minute, some of that traffic is going to South Pasadena, some is going to Pasadena, some, even though we don't have a connection, is going to work their way up and go to La Cañada and points north. Nothing you're doing now is going to fix that. Those cars are still want to go north-south. Well, that's actually correct, but the most important number for you folks are those blue lines that are going east-west through the city of Alhambra. And when I add up all of those numbers, of the 50,000 trips that are going to the right after they get off the stub, almost half, approximately half of them are going north to Pasadena, South Pasadena, up to 210, but a full half, 50% of those, are gonna keep going and work their way to the east through Alhambra. So what we're really trying to do with improvements to Fremont, Alhambra, Fremont, Atlantic, and Garfield, we're trying to relieve that congestion, keep the traffic on I-10 longer. And I would like to take those 25,000 cars that are cutting through Alhambra, got no reason to be there, don't stop in Alhambra, I'd like take those 25,000 cars and put them back on the freeway where we think they belong. So that's why this graphic is so important to us. This shows what we're trying to accomplish with these improvements. It shows that there's a bunch of traffic cutting through Alhambra. Next slide. So let's look at the Fremont Avenue interchange. Next slide. So on the left, you see the congestion level, and you can see red on all four of the ramps that are getting on and off I-10 at this point, or at this interchange. So this is really a critical issue for us. Again, this leads to back up onto the 10, and it it suggests to people that, well, maybe I don't want to go through the 10 at this point. Maybe I'll use the 710 in both directions. Now, if you look over on the right on the aerial photo, what you'll see is very short ramps that are located very close to traffic signals on existing Hellman, on the end of the Fremont underpass. So right now, this interchange, which like all the others here were built in the 1960s to handle traffic growth for 20 years. We're kind of beyond that point now at 2020. We're 60 years beyond when these freeway interchanges were built, designed and built. So the short ramps, the close intersections, the traffic signals at all ends of the ramps here, those are things that are really working against us in terms of trying to get traffic off the freeway, onto the freeway, and off our city streets. Next slide. Atlantic is a different design, and frankly, Atlantic is the design that was the highest capacity interchange design known to man when it was built. So let's look at the next slide. This is called a full cloverleaf interchange. Each quadrant of the interchange has a straight ramp handling either on or off ramps, on or off movements, and each quadrant has a loop ramp that allows you to get on or off the freeway without making left turns. So when this was designed, it was the highest capacity design available. Unfortunately, what has happened is we now have way more traffic on this interchange than it was ever designed to accommodate. And the reason for that is this blue and orange line that you see here. That's that dreaded weave we talked about over at the 71010. The amount of traffic that's coming onto the ramp and trying to get onto the freeway, those two blue lines, have to cross the two orange lines of people trying to get off the freeway through those loop ramps. And that crossing point in the middle just cannot handle the amount of crossing traffic that we have now, 60 years after this interchange was designed. So that's really what's causing the most amount of problem. The other issue are the two red arrows where you see how close the off ramps are to the signals along Atlantic. So those traffic signals back up across the off ramps and really make it difficult to get off those off ramps. Next slide. So the Garfield interchange is even a little squirrelier than the one we just looked at. Go to the next slide. It is a very similar design, but it's much narrower. The distance between the two loop ramps is much narrower than Atlantic. So that blue and orange crossing lines, those are even shorter than at Atlantic. So we have, even though this one's not quite as busy as the Atlantic interchange, we still have congestion there because of that weave. So those weaves, the weave at 710, those are things that we're going to try and figure out how we might be able to solve, what kinds of improvements we might be able to make to relieve that weave and make those two interchanges operate better. So I am almost done. Bob, do you have anything you want to add at this point?
Nope, I think you covered it, Pat.
All right, so let's go to the next slide. So that's kind of our summary of where we are. I know we have a bunch of questions on the Q&A list. So we're happy to go through and take your input.
Is what is the update on connecting the 710 to the 210? Will it happen?
The update is it will never happen. Done, gone. Decision has been made to abandon the 710 connection. Wasn't Alhambra's decision, but that's where we are.
Okay. The next question is, where is the data that shows there is a traffic problem at the 10 freeway in Fremont?
I think the data is those red lines you saw on the graphic. The weave between Fremont and 710, the backup on Fremont in both directions in either the morning or the afternoon peak hour suggests that the Fremont Interchange no longer has the capacity to handle the demand that is being placed on it.
Okay, and one last question, Pat, before we proceed is, hold on, it just moved on me. What is Advancing Alhambra? Is this a company hired by the city, employees of the city, or question mark?
Advancing Alhambra is the fancy name that Renee came up with for this program, so I'm going to blame. No, Advancing Alhambra is just a way for us to brand the work that we're doing on these 4 locations. We're trying to package them as one combined set of improvements that we hope will keep more traffic on I-10 and reduce the amount of through traffic cutting through the city of Alhambra. So it's not a company, it's not a group of city employees, it's just the name for this collection of 4 improvements.
Okay. Do you want to go to the next slide, please? And Pat, you want to walk through these and then we'll open it up for some comments?
Yeah, what we're trying to accomplish tonight is get your reaction to what you've heard, get your input. Do you have ideas about what improvements we should be looking at or making? Obviously, we would like to answer as many of your questions as we can, but what we really want to know is have we missed anything that you think is affecting traffic in in Southwest Alhambra? Are there things we should be looking at that you think we might not be looking at least from what you've seen thus far? So that's what we're trying to accomplish tonight. Just to give you a little preview and steal some of Renee's thunder, maybe. We're going to be back in about a month with what we've heard tonight applied to the Fremont Interchange to show you some ideas about what might be able to be accomplished at the Fremont Interchange and maybe along the freeway itself. So that's what we're trying to look at tonight. And again, we're happy for your input, your ideas, and your questions.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. Thank you so much, Pat. And now we're going to open it up to questions and comments. And just quickly, I'm going to review with everyone. If you want a written comment, I see some in the inbox now. You submit those via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you want a verbal comment, please click on the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen and we'll call on you. And then go ahead and unmute yourself. And for all you folks who are calling in this evening, please push *9 to raise your hand. And we'll call on you by reading out the last 4 digits of your phone number. And at that point, please go ahead and unmute yourself by dialing *6. All right, let's get started. All right. Let's see here. Raised hand. All right. We're going to start with the first caller, and it's Connie Hope.
Good evening, Renee and Pat. I thank you for your presentation. I am a resident of District 4. In fact, my closest intersections 3 blocks away are Fremont and Valley. So as you know, this area is heavily congested and it's impacting me and my family for the 20 years that we've lived here. And one thing that I really would like to hear about next is alternative transportation. Keeping cars on the freeway and building better arterials will not change the traffic situation. If we build the roads, the cars will come and they will keep coming, as your model shows, in 40 years. So what are our alternative transportation plans? We need bike lanes, we need buses, and we need to get cars off the road. It's really important that we move towards a sustainable and climate-centric focused future, because cars are not the answer. We are going to be swimming in traffic, and it's currently perilous to take a walk in my neighborhood right now because of cars cutting through the Ethel Park and the Midwick track neighborhoods. So I'd really, really like to hear more about your plans in terms of alternative transportation and not freeway interchanges. Thank you.
Bob, you want to take that one? You're on mute, Bob.
Thank you for your comment, Connie. And I think, we all realize that the car is not the answer to our future transportation needs and demands. One of the things that we know that Metro has embarked on is a multimodal focus on trying to make these improvements adaptive to people that want to walk in their communities, ride bikes, and provide those improvements. And all these improvements that we're looking at, that we will be looking at, will include those types of improvements. There are larger efforts being done at a larger scale that Metro has embarked on, and we can come back at our next meeting and share some more information.
Thank you. I'm going to take the next caller, Melissa Nicholson.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, hi, thank you. I've been living in Alhambra for over 15 years now, and the traffic is obviously, to me, the worst on Fremont. But it's not bad down by the on ramps and off ramps of the 10 and Fremont. It's bad up by Valley. And my concern that it doesn't look like you're taking into account, that I would like you to take into account, are the two, well, the one big development that they want to build called the Villages on Fremont and Mission, approximately 740 or 774 units they're proposing with over 4,000 parking spots. That's a big concern of mine. And so the traffic buildup is actually north and south, just south of that area. And so I'm worried about that. I'd like to know what you're doing with that. That's number one. And number two is and across the street from that is a big empty lot where it's still empty and we don't know what's going on in the 13 acres right there. So that's my first concern. My second concern is my question that I asked that wasn't answered. I asked the question, what those red lines on the Fremont exit represent in terms of the time of day and also how many cars, because in the previous screen or slide, you demonstrated numbers of cars exiting the 710. I'd like to see that same level of detail with that. And I'd like to know what times of days those are, because frankly, I don't see, and I've never had a problem getting off and getting onto the freeway at Fremont. So that's what I'd like to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa.
All right, so let me talk about the red lines and the level of detail. The red lines you're looking at are primarily in the morning or afternoon peak hour. When we come back to you and look at alternatives for Fremont, we will have volumes that we're looking at, and you'll be able to look and see how many cars are on those ramps, how many cars are projected to be on those ramps. So that level of detail will be part of the analysis. In terms of your concern about potential future development, remember that what we're using here is a model that projects traffic to the year 2040. So those developments and the growth of not only Alhambra, but the growth of all of the San Gabriel Valley are included in the model numbers we have. So I understand your concern about a large development and about multiple large developments, but the numbers, the projections we're using include the growth that cities anticipate to have between now and 2040.
Okay, we're going to take a couple more hands that have risen, and then we're going to turn it over to some written questions. So hang in there if you submitted some written questions. We're going to take now Philippe Osana.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I love the detail and the way that it looks and everything. I'm wondering, I grew up in Alhambra. I went to Alhambra High School. I graduated in 2010. I just moved to Alhambra. I'm wondering what could be addressed with some of the traffic coming out the 710 and the 10 when it comes to Fremont, Atlantic, and Garfield. What could be done to possibly, I don't even think there's space for it, but what could be done to add an extra lane? When I think about that, I think of Huntington Drive, right? There's never traffic on Huntington Drive because there are 3 to 4 lanes for that street. I'm trying to think of, the cars will come, to Connie's point. The cars will come and they will always come. This is a very busy area. It's a very nice area. And my other question would be, if Caltrans did not approve the connection from the 710 to the 210, could they be held responsible to get rid of the 710 extension, that piece that is diverting traffic off the 10 into Alhambra? So what could be considered on the street level between, whether it be Fremont, Atlantic, or Garfield? And 2, what could be done about the 710 stub, and can that be eliminated altogether, or is that something that the state or the federal government has to do, or whatever it is? Thank you.
Okay, so two questions. One, can we eliminate the stub altogether? That answer is yes. We did actually look at that, and we can show you some of those model results. When we took the stub out altogether, we actually sent a lot more traffic through Fremont, Atlantic, Garfield, and New. So it didn't really help us as much as we had hoped it would. In terms of your question about widening streets, that is something we are looking at, but I gotta tell you, there's not much room in any of those corridors before you run into homes or businesses. So widening a street in a built-up area like Alhambra is pretty tough. And with our new evaluation techniques as part of the California Environmental Quality Act, adding capacity to any roadway is a pretty tough environmental impact. So yeah, we're looking at short sections of widening to balance roadways and to get traffic through key intersections. But the likelihood of widening all of Valley Boulevard to get 6 lanes or 8 lanes is pretty slim.
Okay, our next hand up would be Jiao Shang Yang. You get that right?
Hello, my name is Jay Shao. That's okay.
Thank you very much.
No worries. Hi, my name is Jay Shao. I'm a resident of Alhambra. I live near the 7-Eleven that's close to the Fremont ramp, so I personally know how bad the congestion can be, especially on Fremont. I personally have a lot of issues just even getting onto Fremont sometimes. I'm a bit concerned to see that Alhambra has this unprecedented amount of funding from Metro, and I think they just recently revised the guidelines on how the funding could be used, and it looks like it's more leniency on using the funding for alternative transportation, like bike lanes, more bus transit, pedestrian safety. I'm really curious about how Alhambra might be investing some of those taxpayer dollars into bike lanes, which I believe Alhambra has none of at the moment, and more transit that could perhaps be connecting us to the Gold Line or some of these other major transit hubs. I'm really interested in seeing how we can perhaps get less cars on our roads, alleviate that traffic, rather than figure out how can we make the traffic flow faster, maybe getting more people on buses so that there's just less cars in general as well. And that's my comment.
Okay, thank you. Bob, I'm giving you the alternative transportation answers tonight.
As you know, there's a lot of studies, as Pat indicated, throughout the corridor. There's other things that SCAG is looking at, trying to do mobility hubs in the corridor. And there's a lot of interest in improving all the multimodal aspects of transportation and getting less away from the demand on cars. Some of these interchanges that Pat's been talking about, the intersections for pedestrians where the freeway off-ramps connect to the local streets are really terrible to try to navigate as a pedestrian safely. And that's part of the overall set of improvements to try to make those work better. But in a comprehensive manner, we're trying to look at all these improvements, coordinate with all the neighbors and the jurisdictions to come up with a set of improvements that meet the goals of trying to improve the quality of life of Alhambra in these fashion. So hopefully in our subsequent meetings, we'll be able to come back with a little bit more on the alternative transportation, as we mentioned earlier.
Thank you, Bob. I'm going to take a couple written questions at a time now because we have a fair amount to get through. So this is for the engineering team. I'm going to read 2 questions. First question is, how do HOV lanes figure into this model? And the second question is, how soon can the signage north to Pasadena be changed?
So to answer the first question, the high occupancy vehicle lanes and the high occupancy toll lanes are indeed included in the model. So we can look at how many cars are using, how many buses are using those lanes as we look through time. So the HOV lanes are in the model and are being accounted for. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
The second question is, how soon can the signage north to Pasadena be changed?
As soon as Bob goes down and beats up some folks at, I don't know, we now that 710 is no more and there won't be a connection in there, we really have to sit down with Caltrans and figure out what those signs mean. How are we doing it? Do we want to change all those signs to Alhambra? Maybe not, but we certainly don't want to leave them as directing people to Pasadena, because the only way to get to Pasadena is by cutting through Alhambra. So it's a little bit of a conundrum. We have to figure out from a regional perspective, how does the signing and the directionality make sense?
Okay, the next question is, more congestion is expected at Mission Road at its intersection with Fremont, Atlantic, and Garfield. Did you study these locations? If you improve the ramps at the 10 freeway, you will exacerbate congestion at these locations.
Well, if we're able to improve the ramps at Atlantic, Fremont, and Garfield, if we're able to reduce the capacity and the attractiveness of the I-10 stub and keep more traffic on the I-10, we won't be adding more traffic to the north-south, at least in the Mission area. What happens now, as everybody knows, people get off the stub, get onto Valley, turn left onto Fremont if they can catch the light correctly, or they'll go a little bit further on Valley and then go up and use Mission. So the whole role of Mission in terms of carrying regional traffic, that's not really what Mission is intended to do. That's not what the council wanted to do with that roadway when they voted to improve it with landscaped medians. So you're right, we need to figure out how to make Mission and its intersecting north-south streets work to serve the neighborhoods without serving as a cut-through road for people that are headed to points east.
Next question. Oh, they just moved on me. Why are the 710 funds being used to improve the freeway as opposed to the roads within the city?
Well, they're really being used for both. We think that the numbers and the models and the volume show that if we can relieve some of the congestion on the freeway, some of those 25,000 people that are cutting through your town in an east-west direction, some of those will not be on your local streets anymore. So by spending money on the freeway, we are actually reducing traffic on city streets.
Would improving the ramps encourage drivers to continue cutting through Alhambra?
Well, we think not. We think improving the ramps and improving the operation of the interchanges will allow traffic to stop backing up onto the freeway and make the freeways operate better.
Next question, Philippe, we've already answered your two questions with the lanes on existing streets and the elimination of the 710 stub. We've answered a question from Melissa Nicholson. Would it be less expensive to improve traffic signal operations instead of reconstructing freeway ramps?
Yes, it would always be less expensive to improve your traffic signals, but given the fact that these interchanges are 60 years old, there's no amount of signal timing that's going to change the fact that I've got not enough room for traffic to weave through those cloverleaf interchanges. So I think it has to be a combination of both. And the city is already, as you saw from one of the early slides, the city is already pursuing traffic signal synchronization and upgrades to the traffic signal equipment on many of our corridors. So the interchange ramp upgrades are really being done in concert with traffic signal improvements.
Okay, I don't have any more hands raised, so I'm going to continue to take the written questions. The next question, Pat, I believe you answered what time of day those red lines represented on your chart, on your graphic.
Yeah, those are morning and afternoon peak hours. 7 to 9 in the morning, 4 to 6, 4 to 7 in the afternoon.
Great. Will any homes need to be demolished for these projects? And if so, how many?
Well, when you say these projects, the answer is, I don't know. We're developing alternatives for each of these locations. And some of the alternatives have impacts on right-of-way, impacts on businesses and homes. Many do not. So obviously, the toughest thing to do in Southern California is to do any transportation improvement that requires more right-of-way. And the absolute toughest thing to do is require right-of-way that's residential land. So we're going to bring back alternatives to show you, and with each of those alternatives, we're going to show you what it means in terms of whether or not we need to build or to buy any additional right-of-way. So I can't answer that question right now, but I will be able to answer it as we look at each of these individual 4 areas of study.
Another written question. I find that some of these ramps are really dangerous for pedestrians. How are these ramps changes going to make sure this will be safe for pedestrians?
I think Bob touched on that already, that the ramp configurations, the free flow cloverleaf ramps are really tough for a pedestrian or a bicyclist to get across. So when we look at alternatives, we're going to look at not only how cars flow through the interchange, but we're also going to look at what does it mean? What do the improvements mean for both pedestrians and bicyclists? So good question, and that's absolutely part of the evaluation.
On the 710 northbound to Valley Boulevard, could a street be built to connect to Mission Drive?
Well, strangely enough, we looked at that. And what we hoped when we extended 2 lanes or 4 lanes of a street from Valley to Mission, what we hoped is half of the traffic would take Valley and the other half would go up and use Mission, and we would be able to split up that traffic and divide the impacts. We would be able to cut the left turns at Fremont and Valley in half because we were giving you an alternate route. In fact, what the model showed is that nobody turned at Valley, everybody went to Mission. And Mission, the whole Mission corridor just got crushed. And the only way to handle that was to tear up all the medians that we just put in there. And that just didn't seem to make much sense. So we did look at Mission as a relief valve, and it turned out it wasn't a relief valve. It was just another different shortcut.
Another question that we received is the most congested area in Alhambra is on Fremont between Mission and Valley Boulevard. I don't understand why these other sites are being mentioned. There's no information about the other sites and what the plans are.
Well, again, we're just starting. So as we develop alternatives and plans and concepts for all 4 of those sites, we're going to come back and go through those with you and get your reactions to those alternatives.
Another question that we received through our survey results, it's a statement, but Pat, I'm going to read it. Please study bridging the 710 to Mission, please.
That is exactly what we studied. We went to Mission with a bridge over the railroad tracks, and I told you what the results of that were.
The biggest problem is Fremont between Mission and the 10 going both direction. Also Valley eastbound, turning northbound onto Fremont. These traffic proposals seem to prioritize traffic flow on the 10 freeway instead of flow within the city itself.
So let's make sure we understand what we're trying to accomplish here. I just showed you that select link analysis that showed 50,000 cars a day wanted to turn right and go east on Valley, and the vast majority of them want to go north and south on, or are trying to go north and south on Fremont. So what I'm doing by having a congested freeway is I'm forcing 50,000 cars a day through the city of Alhambra. 50,000 cars a day is essentially an 8-lane roadway. I have the equivalent of an 8-lane roadway worth of traffic shortcutting through this town. 25,000 of those are trying to go north. 25,000 of those are going east-west through the city. But almost all 50,000 of those want to turn left and right at Fremont and Valley. It doesn't work. So if I could get 25,000, if I could get the east-west traffic to stay on the freeway and not turn left and right at Fremont and Valley, I could cut that movement in half, and then the intersection could work. So that's what we're trying to look at.
Couple more survey comments, and then we'll go back to our live participants and additional written comments. I live in the subdivision right off the 710 on the north side of Valley. It is a nightmare trying to get out of our neighborhood. The light at Westminster and Valley is ridiculous, and I cannot see the traffic on Valley, and I can't see why the traffic on Valley takes precedence over us.
Well, almost all traffic signals are set up to give green time and give red lights to the phases or the directions of travel that have the highest volume. So that the traffic signal, all traffic signals are trying to reduce overall delay. That reduces congestion, it reduces air pollution, it reduces frustration. So in the case of traffic signals along Fremont, the vast majority of that traffic is east-west, so they get the most amount of the green time. Again, 50,000 cars on Fremont, on Valley, 50,000 cars are coming from the Stub. if I convince 25,000 of those to stay in the freeway by fixing the interchanges along the freeway and reducing the backups onto the freeway, I've cut the amount of traffic driving next to your neighborhood in half. That's really the goal.
The last comment received from the survey: my children attend Fremont School, and we do not want our school impacted by these decisions.
Nobody does. So we're looking at alternatives that don't touch the school.
Okay, I'm going to take one caller, Philippe Osana.
Hello again. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I was wondering if there are any, just from a comment from earlier, are there active plans to add bike lanes and more, opportunities for buses on Fremont, Atlantic, and Garfield? I'm a believer that, bike lanes make the street busier. You have to draw the lines for it. You have to create the space for it. Buses make the street busier. They have to stop, right? It stops the traffic behind them, and then they try to go into the left lane. So I'm wondering if there are plans to do that, because I would be against those plans, but I'm just curious if there are active plans to add bike lanes and more opportunities for busing on those major streets that are already busy.
Well, it's a it's a juggling act. I mean, obviously, we would like to get people out of their cars, onto bikes, onto transit. We would like to improve the choices that people have. But in this case, as you say, sometimes if I want to put bike lanes in, I have to give up some automobile capacity. If I want to increase my transit to give us more choices, I may end up affecting automobile capacity in a corridor. But right now, we're really focusing on the three interchanges, as opposed to doing corridor studies of Fremont, Atlantic, and Garfield all the way through the city. The city is currently working on corridor studies in terms of upgrading the traffic signals and the traffic signal equipment. I'm not aware that that they're looking at any widespread bike lane improvements. And Martin may be able to answer that question. Or not.
Or not. Martin, okay.
Oh, here he is.
There he is.
Getting it started. Sorry about that.
There
There
we
you
are.
are.
The city has been applying for grant funding to perform a bike study. Actually, it's a multimodal improvement plan, but we haven't received any grant funding for it yet. So it is something the city's looking into and trying to commit to. But until we receive the grant funding for a master plan for it, we haven't moved forward.
Okay, I'm going to move to the next question. It's a long question, so hang in there with me. Even if we keep them on the 10, it will only be for an exit or two. So aside from relieving some traffic at Fremont, wouldn't you just be loading up Atlantic and Garfield, increasing traffic at those arteries? Is the goal just to distribute the cars throughout Alhambra, or to find ways to reduce congestion on our main roads? I know it's unrealistic, but I'd love to see Huntington be the only arterial to get from the 10 to South Pass or Pasadena, as these cut-through trips are deteriorating the city. Can we go back?
Boy, you're trying to get me in the middle of the South Pasadena controversy here. I'm not falling for that one. Look, the Alhambra is in a really unique position. When you say I only I'm only going to keep traffic on the freeway for 1 or 2 interchanges more. Well, the fact of the matter is, if I kept traffic on I-10 for 1 or 2 interchanges more, I'm basically out of Alhambra. So if I'm really trying to address that east-west traffic that's now cutting through your city, I don't have to keep the traffic on I-10 very much longer to be effective at that goal.
Would continuing a gap road from the 710 Stub to Mission help relieve traffic congestion?
Well, I think I answered that one. We did test that, we did try that, and it pushed a whole bunch of traffic to the Mission Road corridor, which isn't as capable of handling that traffic as Valley Boulevard is. So it didn't really help us. It just pushed the traffic and pushed the congestion to Mission.
When will this improvement begin on Garfield, Atlantic, or Fremont?
We're looking at Fremont first, and then the Stub, and then we'll look at alternatives for Atlantic and Garfield. So that's kind of the hierarchy of the 4 locations we're looking at.
Okay, my second question was not asked. I asked the numbers and time of day that the red lines are, let me go back, excuse me. I asked the numbers and time of day that the red lines at Fremont and 10 represent. I believe that you had an answer, Pat, of AM and PM peak.
Yeah, they generally represent 7 to 9 and 4 or 5 until 7 p.m. So it's 2 hours in the morning and 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon peak hour. And in terms of the numbers that they represent, when we get into evaluating the actual performance of these different concepts or different alternatives, we will show you exactly how many trips in the morning and afternoon peak hour are trying to use these individual ramps.
The next question is, traffic's going south on Fremont to hop on the 10 freeway. It gets backed up too. There was no mention of that. Will that be part of the solution?
Yes, we are looking at how to improve the ramps at Fremont so that cars can get onto the freeway. We want to lengthen those ramps to make it easier to merge into the eastbound and westbound I-10 ramps. What's happening now is that it's easier to come south on Fremont, turn right on Valley, and then turn left onto the 710 Stub. So that's the way people are going because of the constraints at the Fremont I-10 interchange.
What percentage of traffic that exists from the I-710 north on Valley is Alhambra residents? Seems to me that either you increase traffic going east through Alhambra on Valley Boulevard, or you increase traffic going north on Fremont, Atlantic, and Garfield.
Well, I don't know if the 2 parts of that question are necessarily true. I think if you look at the 58,000 cars a day projected to be on the 710 Stub, it's a relatively small percentage of those that actually have a destination in Alhambra. I will get that number for you, but my quick review of that select link analysis suggests that it's in the 10 to 20% range. So 80 to 90% of the traffic on that Stub doesn't really care. Alhambra is just in their way.
Okay, and next question. How will on and off ramps projects address the safety needs of people walking? Currently, they are very treacherous to cross on foot when walking between cities.
Again, I think Bob talked about that. One of the key evaluation points we will look at in all of the concepts we come up with will be the effect of that particular design or that alternative on pedestrian and bikes operating along Fremont, Garfield, Atlantic. So that is a Caltrans requirement that we look at designs that will make that safer and make that easier for non-automobiles.
Okay. The next question is, how will the Metro funding be utilized for public transit in our area? I find that we have better transit to transit hubs. We could alleviate traffic on these congested roads.
Well, the Metro funding that's available as a result of the 710 is really being investigated, and it's up to the cities within a certain level of parameters to spend that money on alternatives that will accommodate traffic and movement of people in acknowledgement of the fact that we're not going to have a 710 connection anymore. So it would be very difficult for Alhambra to use the amount of money that we're getting for this set of improvements to do anything major in terms of transit with that. We can't build a light rail line with the amount of money that's in the 710 fund allocated to Alhambra. So we're going to look at how do we best connect these roadways and support non-auto travel modes. But it's not a lot of money that the city is getting from this 710.
Our next question is, what is the timeline for the Fremont Valley decision on which course will be taken? Pat, I think you answered this earlier, and as we might want to remind our community, we will be taking people's input, the comments we received tonight, and coming back and analyzing and coming back to the community. Pat said mid-June. Pat, anything to add to that in terms of timing?
No, I think it is a process. The neighborhood, the residents, the business community, the stakeholders all have to weigh in on what makes the most sense to them. Then the Planning Commission and Council have to look at it. Then Caltrans is going to have to look at some of it, because some of it we're going to deal with state highways. So we're not going to make a final decision on in the middle of June, but we're gonna make some progress toward that decision. That's the goal.
It makes more sense to extend the 710 to Mission Road in order to get drivers past the bottleneck and Mission.
Well, it does if you're willing to trade a bottleneck in one location for a worse one that's a quarter mile away or a half mile away.
People will inevitably need to go from the 710 Arterial to 210. The plans presented today appear to only alleviate traffic on the 10 freeway to prevent people from cutting through Alhambra. Are there any plans to improve the 710 to the 210 commute?
No. And mostly South Pasadena and Pasadena have said they're not interested in those plans.
Okay. I'm going to take a couple more questions for Pat and the team. Let's see here. What information is there to justify advancing 710 Stub and the Arterial to Mission Street in the north?
Read the first part of that again.
What information is there to justify advancing the 710 Stub / Arterial to Mission Street in the north?
Well, there isn't any data to justify it. The data we have suggests that it's not a good idea, and that data was presented, and it's in the first or second presentation that was made public last January and June. So I believe that presentation is included on the website.
And our last question, can you address other forms of traffic congestion such as more modern traffic signals? Also, I feel that big rigs also add to congestion in the city. Is there a way to divert big rigs onto other roads?
Well, first of all, the first part of the question is about modern traffic signals. And I think when we looked at what Alhambra is doing now in terms of using its state and regional funds, we are already looking at upgrading and improving traffic signals in the main corridors of the city. So that question is being answered right now. It is in fact in process. In terms of big rigs, I think if we learned anything in the pandemic, it's how important trucking and movement of goods are to all of us. So yes, there are ways to limit heavy trucks to certain corridors within the city to keep those heavy trucks off local and collector streets. But if a truck has a legitimate delivery along a street, it has the authority to use that street. So the city, as part of its general plan, has a truck route program. And I mean, that truck route program can always be reviewed, but as much as Amazon comes to my house, there's a bunch of vans and small trucks running around out there that we've suddenly, or over the last year, we've grown to depend on.
And we have one last caller that I'd like to take, and it's AP Medina. Please unmute.
Hi, my name is AP and I've lived in Alhambra for about 20 years. I've lived in the Alhambra Park neighborhood. I've lived in Emery Park, and now I live in Granada Park. I have two questions. The first question I had was related about whether this recording or this was being recorded. I wanted to, and if it is, I wanted to share it with my neighbors. Some of them were not able to attend tonight. And then my second comment that I have is related to a PowerPoint presentation that I was able to find on the city's website. And it shows that the preferred scenario for the Fremont Avenue on and off ramps would demolish approximately 15 residences. It would demolish a portion of the 7-Eleven shopping center. And then it would also demolish a portion of Fremont Avenue Elementary School. Could you please elaborate a little bit on that? Thank you so much.
Yeah, to answer your first question, yes, this presentation tonight is being recorded, but let me warn you that if you make your neighbors sit through listening to Bob and I, you're not going to be very popular in your neighborhood anymore. Second, in terms of the early designs that we all looked at and showed and that you saw in that presentation, what we were asked to do was if money were no object, if reality was no constraint, what's the highest capacity interchange you could build at this location? And when people saw what that answer was, they said, oh, maybe that's not really what we want. So that's why we're coming back to you next month and showing you a number of different concepts and alternatives that don't take the school, that don't take dozens of pieces of property in the city. So understand what that was and what it was for. That is not currently, nor is it likely to be, a recommended solution to the Fremont Interchange design. So I hope that helps.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, AP. Okay, with that, I want to be very mindful. It's a little past 7:30. Van, if you could go to the next step slide, that'd be great. And I just want to thank everyone for your time and remind everyone that the community's input is extremely critical in this process. As Pat mentioned, the team will be taking the next month or so to compile your input, your questions, your concepts, and come back to the community. We're hoping in mid-June. And I just want to remind everyone, if we didn't get to you this evening, or you think of something later and you want to ask a question, please send us your comments. Go to the website and fill out our online survey, ask us questions. The website again is advancingalhambra.org. And while you're there, take that survey and really provide some meaningful input so that we can get all your questions and comments and idea inputted in this. There's also a Get Connected tab on the website, so all the information is there. And hope that you'll come to our meeting next month. We will reach out to everyone that has participated and all those folks who couldn't make it. We will continue to communicate with the neighborhood and the community. And we wanted to thank you very much, Alhambra, for participating this evening, and we'll see you in June. Thank you.